And welcome to another Friday afternoon edition of the really live business of cannabis talk show we call Green Rush Live here on Pro Cannabis Media. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, and over the next couple of hours, we're going to be talking about testing procedures in the cannabis industry. There's a lot of controversy going on in various states, and sure enough, we've got lab people and scientists from all over the country coming in to chit chat and answer some of the questions that we might have about some of the inconsistencies in testing, not just in lab to lab or product to product, but state to state as well. And we've got a pretty damn good lineup, and I'm going to obviously welcome in my pals Doug Miller and Josh Kincaid with us this afternoon. And since it is the third Friday of the month, we also have our friend from NORML in Washington, D.C. His name is Morgan Fox. Morgan, again, thank you for showing up and being here for us every month.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me.
All right. So the $1 million question every week, Morgan, we want to know what the heck is going on with Chuck Schumer, meeting with some bipartisan group in the Senate. Perhaps something might evolve out of those talks. What's the latest on any kind of federal reform in Washington, D.C.?
Well, conversations are ongoing about the path that cannabis policy reform is going to take in the Senate. Earlier this year, Senate Majority Leader Schumer met with Democratic colleagues who have been leaders on this issue in the Senate, and is now starting to cross over the aisle to determine what might be feasible in the current session, based on a lot of the negotiations that happened both before and after the midterm elections last year. As I'm sure that you and your viewers recall, there was a last-ditch attempt to attach banking and expungement and Second Amendment protections to several must-pass spending packages, and unfortunately, those were blocked by Senator McConnell. But at the same time, we probably could have gotten the votes for at least some of those things had Senate Majority Leader Schumer introduced them as standalones earlier in the year instead of waiting until the very last minute. But there's plenty of blame to go around as far as that's concerned. But now in the current Congress, we are already seeing movement on incremental legislation in the House. We've already seen bills be introduced relating to research and veterans protection and access, and several other items. So, I think that, there's definitely still a lot of appetite to get things done on the House side. The question is going to be what gets prioritized both there as well as in the Senate, and what is actually feasible to be passed. A good indicator is that, this week, in fact, just yesterday, for what I believe is the very first time, a Senate committee, that being the Veterans Affairs Committee, approved a bill to study the potential medical benefits of cannabis for various conditions that are very prominent in the veteran community. This is definitely a good first step, and everything that I'm seeing says that this particular bill is being fast-tracked. We saw the introduction of the House Companion as well pretty recently, and I expect that we will probably see movement on the House side as well in terms of committee hearings. But I don't see a lot of opposition there. Unfortunately, this particular bill doesn't have a whole lot of impact. It's great that it would direct the VA to study these things, but it doesn't really create a requirement that they do so. There's an odd distinction between observational data and clinical studies that doesn't really make much sense. But also, there's plenty of information already available, both scientific and anecdotal, that cannabis helps veterans treat a number of conditions, everything from PTSD to traumatic brain injuries or chronic pain. So we don't necessarily need to do more research in order for the VA to solidify its policies. But we've already seen the introduction of another bill by Representative Stubbe from Florida that would actually codify the policies that exist currently at the VA into law, being that if you're a medical cannabis patient in compliance with state law, that you don't have to worry about having your benefits impacted or other forms of treatment offered through the VA impacted either. So we already have legislators that are trying to move past that.
And some of the stories you brought up are right in the middle of, actually right at the beginning of our weekly We Talk news show that follows the 2-hour really live stream we're doing right now. That'll be coming up at 6 o'clock. And one of the biggest stories that has evolved over the last week is the softening of what I call censorship by Twitter and by Google folks on cannabis. Now, when we put cannabis in quotes on that because there's a difference between the hemp world and topicals and that sort of thing versus the THC infused other items that are involved as well. But is this not a good sign, a softening of some of the community guidelines of some of the biggest social media companies, that this could be a good sign that might trickle down into the coffers of the federal government?
Well, on the one hand, it's a step in the right direction that social media companies are starting to loosen some of their restrictions, which frankly have been insane over the years, to the point where a lot of these restrictions were not just applying to people that were actually trying to sell cannabis products or hemp products, but were actually being applied to advocacy organizations. I mean, every single organization that I've worked with has faced problems with getting their ads rejected or being shadow banned in some fashion, simply because the word cannabis was mentioned. And the nature of these companies is such that it's very difficult to get such bans or restrictions lifted, even if you can prove to them that you're not actually selling cannabis products. Now, while on the surface this is a step in the right direction, I do worry that there might be some unintended consequences of this, because based on the actual nature of the new allowances, which are really pretty much limited to products that meet the legal definition of legal hemp, so beneath 0.3% THC. This is going to open the door for a lot of unregulated producers to be able to advertise, while regulated producers and retailers will still not be able to.
That's interesting. All right, I got Josh Kincaid, Doug Miller here alongside. I want to get them involved with this as well so that they can ask you some of the questions they might have. Josh, go ahead. You can go first.
Well, I mean, first off, I think anytime the government is getting involved and they're allowing for it, and that discussion is allowed, especially for veterans who have PTSD and so many other ailments, I think that's a positive. I mean, overall, are we gaining more acceptance? I mean, that in and of itself is huge news. And just the fact that they're accepting it and allowing it and discussing it. Is there any talks about having MMJ scripts and allowing for medical cannabis use by veterans prescribed, or having more resources for them inside of the VA?
Absolutely. And this conversation has been going on for quite a while. In the previous Congress, there was a lot of effort being put towards passing bills that would not only codify protections for medical cannabis patients, but also would explicitly allow VA doctors to be able to recommend medical cannabis in states where it's legal. And then we saw a lot of other legislation related to those issues, such as amendments to the NDAA that would have prevented the VA from discriminating against veterans who work in the medical cannabis or in the cannabis industry from being denied home loans through the VA system, and a whole slew of other things, and ranging from like we were seeing right now, simple studies to really robust protections and restoration of rights, and making sure that they can continue to get the treatment and benefits that they deserve if they're cannabis consumers, whether medical or legal and compliant adult users. We're seeing that continuation, or we're seeing a continuation of that conversation now. Like I said, we already saw a bill that goes a lot farther than the bill that was approved in the Senate committee, introduced in the House already. And I expect that we're going to see the reintroduction of the Veterans Equal Access Act within the next month or so, hopefully as soon as possible. And then, we're not really seeing a lot of pushback on this particular issue. And I think that this is kind of indicative of a general growing acceptance of cannabis issues generally among members of Congress. I think a lot of people were really scared that we wouldn't be able to get anything done in such a divided Congress. But I think that there's a lot of ability for us to get some incremental measures passed relating to veterans and expungement and banking and a number of other issues that will help raise the bar and get lawmakers more comfortable with supporting these issues. Just from my own personal experience, I can tell you that just walking around the halls of Congress and doing drop-ins in congressional offices on both the Senate and House side, in years past, when you asked, the people at reception who was in charge of the cannabis portfolio, they oftentimes would have no idea, or they'd have to look around. And every single office that I've dropped into unexpectedly this year, they can immediately point me towards who's handling the cannabis issues. And I think that is indicative of a real sea change in terms of how seriously this issue is being taken in Congress.
Oh, that is a good sign. All right, Doug, you're next, pal.
All right, so I have a different question. I want to know, what have you heard about the gun laws and cannabis licenses? Because apparently they're saying that you can have a gun permit and a cannabis license. Then you hear you're not allowed to have a gun permit and a cannabis license. What have you been hearing on Washington? And because I know it's been a debate lately, so I was just kind of wondering what you've heard.
Well, so very recently there was a ruling by a judge in the federal Western District of Oklahoma that basically said that you cannot be discriminated against or have your Second Amendment rights curtailed because you are a cannabis consumer or of any sort. Unfortunately, that's not universally binding, but it does set an excellent precedent. And I think that it's going to force the Department of Justice to really rethink some of its rationale in trying to challenge lawsuits that are based on this issue. Now, lawsuits aside, we are seeing legislative movement on this. Already this year, we've seen Representative Mooney from West Virginia, along with Representatives Mast and several other Republican co-sponsors, introduce legislation that would explicitly protect the rights of medical cannabis patients in terms of their Second Amendment rights. I expect that we will see another bill be introduced in the relatively near future that would go beyond that and protect all cannabis users that are in compliance with state law from having to answer that question and risk perjuring themselves on federal firearm purchase application forms. So we're definitely seeing movement in that area, both in the courts and on the Hill. And I think that this is a perfect example of one of those incremental issues that we can address in a Republican-led House, and that could very easily see movement even in a democratically led Senate, because this isn't necessarily about guns. This is about discrimination against cannabis consumers. And so it's something that I think people on both sides of the aisle can get behind, because it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And it certainly doesn't fit the DOJ's definition of why people should be denied these rights, where their motions to dismiss lawsuits have basically compared anybody who uses cannabis to a violent domestic abuser.
Can you dumb that down for me on a state level? How can we at the state level supersede federal level? It's the same equivalent of if you wear denim, you can't vote. How is that legal?
Mhm.
Well, so really, this is an issue with the Federal Firearms Act, and so there is a form that you have to fill out whenever you're purchasing a firearm, no matter where you are. And there's a line on that form that explicitly says that you have to check, like, are you addicted to or currently using illegal substances? And there's an addendum that says something along the lines of, even if cannabis is legal for medical or recreational purposes in the state in which you reside. So if you're purchasing a firearm and you say, no, I'm not, addicted to marijuana, or no, or you basically lie on that form, you are open to federal perjury charges, which can carry several years in prison if convicted. But the Federal Firearms Act, which I believe was passed in the early '90s, it was has jurisdiction over the entire country. So no matter what the state laws are with regard to cannabis, the federal law when it comes to firearms still holds. Now, a number of states have actually taken measures to address this. States like Oregon and Michigan, I believe, and several others have taken steps to change their state laws with regard to things like concealed carry licenses, where they made specific exceptions for people that are medical patients in compliance with those states' laws. But you still have to deal with the issue of federal law. So, and unfortunately, they still have jurisdiction in this area.
Yeah, I know. And go back to the veterans. A lot of veterans that won't get the medical card because of that reason, because obviously they like to have their gun permits, and yeah, it's a whole gray area, and it's terrible because it's like, hey, these veterans went and fought for their life. They come back, cannabis works for them, but you don't want to give them the proper medication because you want to argue about a gun. They have the right to have a gun, and yeah, it's just a crazy thing.
And to be clear, we really haven't seen so much issue with possession of firearms, especially if they're purchased legally. But purchasing has been an issue. People are put in a position where they have to either commit perjury on a federal firearm form, or be denied their ability to purchase a firearm. So this is definitely something that we need to change, and that affects a lot of people, particularly veterans and former law enforcement, who are among the plaintiffs in the lawsuit filed by former Florida official Nikki Fried, who since leaving office has dropped off of that lawsuit, but I believe the other plaintiffs have continued that suit.
Can I ask a couple of things? You mentioned a few things about both sides of the aisle, and we talk about a la carte issues that you think might be incremental steps towards a bigger goal of, and I don't like to use the word legalization, I'm big on normalization, but getting it off Schedule 1, the DOJ investigation into whether or not cannabis has any medicinal benefits. Meanwhile, we've got hundreds of thousands of people that have medical cards and using it medicinally. So what are some of those incremental issues that you see that perhaps the other side of the aisle, as opposed to the Democrat, the other side, might be interested in talking about? And I would think that I would still maintain, I don't understand how banking hasn't moved forward. I don't care what political party you are.
Well, I think that, banking is definitely on the table for the current congressional session. As we've already discussed, Second Amendment protections and veterans access and protections are certainly on the table. Research absolutely is on the table. I think that we can probably expect to see some movement, or at least hopefully we'll see some movement in protecting federal employees as well as people seeking security clearances from being discriminated against for past or present cannabis use. That one might be a little bit of a tougher slog, but I think that it's 100% within the realm of possibility. We're just waiting to see that. There are also a lot of other issues, I think, on the margins as well that could potentially move forward. I mean, I think that we're absolutely going to see a continuation of the appropriations prohibition against the DOJ interfering with state medical cannabis programs. And I think that it's very possible that we'll see that extended to adult use programs as well, provided that we do enough outreach to, really folks on both sides of the aisle, because this doesn't have unanimous Democratic support either. But I think it's very possible that we could see that move forward as well. So, there may be other issues that come up as well. I think ones that probably stand a little bit less of a chance of passing through a GOP-controlled House are things like access to SBA loans and grant programs by cannabis businesses. But I'm really hoping that I'm wrong. However, I do think that, in addition to things like banking, we might be able to see bankruptcy protections enacted in the current session for not only cannabis businesses themselves, but for the individuals that work at them. And, right now, it's a really bad situation that we're in, where, a lot of times people that are working for cannabis businesses are ineligible to be able to file for bankruptcy, or at least have a much more difficult time doing so. And that is really unfortunate when you look at the fact that a lot of cannabis businesses are failing because of overtaxation and because of overregulation and lack of federal change.
And I'd be remiss if we didn't discuss California's move towards looking for partnerships on interstate commerce. Is that a possibility state to state, even though federal hasn't changed much when it comes to looking at the law?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, the federal government has the final say so when it comes to interstate commerce. That being said, states can certainly enter into these compacts and test the DOJ. See if they're going to interfere with it. I mean, every single legal cannabis system, whether medical or adult use right now, is illegal at the federal level. So the question is, how far can they go before the federal government decides to step in and put a stop to it, if they will at all? I think that this is kind of ripe for a test case. And also the fact that this might be compacts between just a handful of states will not only give us a lot of data before we start seeing real serious movement towards federal descheduling and allowing interstate commerce throughout the country, but will also provide the sort of slow roll in that a lot of advocates who are concerned about instant initiation of the dormant commerce clause that could come with descheduling would have on state markets, and in particular, state market social equity programs. So, I think that, it's really just up to these states about, whether or not, well, first of all, whether or not they're able to find recipient states, import states that are willing to enter into these compacts. And I've heard that New Jersey and some other states have been potentially interested in that, but I haven't seen any legislative action along those lines within those states yet. But also how far these state governments are willing to go to test the DOJ in terms of their patience for behavior that is federally illegal.
Oregon passed that 2 years ago, contingent on federal, which could that part could be lifted, and then they could trade between California and Oregon in a similar fashion that Portland was running to Vancouver, Washington, when Washington legalized, and we have all these neighboring states, right? So I would disagree with your comment that the feds have the final say. We have jury nullification. So even if you do get busted, maybe the jury knows about it and they'll nullify you, and it won't happen. Court of public opinion is another way of saying that. But when you see neighboring states and people jumping across the board, I think we already see the writing on the wall. Money's there, and Oregon's there. California will follow suit. Washington, and then that'll just push the feds to say, okay, let's just open this up. And they don't want to fight it. They don't care.
I'm a big fan of jury nullification, but I guarantee you, any federal prosecutor that wants to push it can find a jury that will convict.
They're still out there. There are still plenty of people out there that don't want to have anything to do with this plant. And it is one of the biggest frustrations of anyone that I talk to that's in the cannabis industry. So as usual, Morgan, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on what is the latest towards federal legalization, normalization, movement, all of those neat issues that cannabis is right in the middle of. So Morgan, as always, thank you for coming on. We'll definitely see you in a few more weeks. We're going to take a break now. It is just after 4:20, after all, on a Friday afternoon. I'm going to sneak over to the chat room and leave the testing conversation to Doug and to Josh. So don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.
With that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out. Don't forget to smash that like button on your way out and check out these other videos that we've got.